All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the Walker's Legacy Preparing for Primetime Hangout featuring award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, wife, and mother, Soledad OBrien. My name is Natalie Madeira Cofield, and I am the founder and CCC, Chief Chick in Charge of Walker's Legacy. Founded in 2009 and named in honor of Madam C.J. Walker, the first self-made female millionaire in U.S. history, Walker's Legacy was created with a mission to cultivate an ecosystem of access designed to inspire, equip, and engage a global network of professional and entrepreneurial women of color. We are currently in operation in 5 cities across the country and are looking forward to further national expansions in 2015 and beyond. Thank you to all who are joining us today online and to our title partner, Accelerate with Google, for their continued partnership and making today possible. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce our partner, Jewel Burks, Diversity Evangelist for Accelerate with Google, to provide a few opening remarks.
Thanks, Natalie, and thanks so much for having this important conversation. I'm here representing Accelerate with Google, and Accelerate with Google supports businesses and communities that are underrepresented on the web. So we are all about growing diversity and inclusion in Google's customer base. And we're excited to grow this partnership with Walker's Legacy by continuing to produce programs like this one. So again, very excited to join this conversation, and I'll be coming back with some questions at the end for Soledad from our audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jewel, and thank you to the entire Accelerate with Google team. So let's get started. Sometimes it takes the insight of someone who has walked the same path as us to motivate us, and as such, today we've invited Soledad OBrien for a discussion on building your personal brand, your career, and your business. Soledad, thank you so much for joining us today. Soledad, I'll read a bit of her biography. Soledad is an author, philanthropist, and former CNN anchor. She is currently the CEO of Starfish Media Group, which produces special segments and documentaries for CNN, HBO, and Al Jazeera America. OBrien distinguished herself at CNN by reporting from the scene of such stories as the London terrorism attacks in 2005, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and the Japan earthquake and tsunami in 2011. She also produced and hosted the widely acclaimed In America documentary series, including Black in America and Latino in America. So because we're really interested in hearing from the women who are joining us online today, we wanted to ask you all what you would ask Soledad OBrien. I know for me, she's been my idol for quite some time, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to interview her, but I didn't want to be completely selfish. So we opened it up, and we received more than 100 different questions from women across the country on what you'd like to hear from Soledad. And we've broken up today's conversation in themes. Let's start. The first theme is around career building. Soledad, you've had a very amazing career that's taken you all over the world. Sonia Smith Valentine wanted to know, what steps have you taken to build your network of connections so that you could grow your career and business?
I think the most important thing is to be comfortable with change and actually to be flexible. I think probably my biggest strength and that made me successful in my career was that I really, especially with something bad happening, getting fired off a show or having something, deciding I was going to leave my job because I hated my boss or whatever it was, I would have 24 hours of sort of in my bed crying, eating Haagen-Dazs, and then I'd kind of roll around and be like, okay, well, here's what I'm good at. Here's what I should be doing. I was incredibly flexible, and I think sort of being good about bouncing back from change is probably the most important thing when you're trying to think about how to be successful in your career, because there's one thing that's guaranteed is there's going to be change. Sometimes it'll be great change. It'll be amazing change. Other times it'll be horrible change. And then sometimes it'll be change and you're not really sure what it is. And so you have to be constantly making your own opportunities. And that mindset of flexibility and embracing change, I think, really helped a lot.
Well, thank you for that, because, a lot of times people see women that they aspire to be like, and they think that everything is easy. And you just shared that you're just like all of us. You're human, and you have your moments where you cry your heart out, and you get up and you start over again, which I think is the key point for being successful in anything. One of the other questions we have from Elizabeth Posey is, what kind of support did you seek out, and or systems did you put in place when you struck out on your own? And you alluded to that a little bit, but if you could give us more on that.
Yeah, I think I've been really aggressive about that. So number one, I've been really lucky. My husband really has the heart of an entrepreneur. He's an investment banker, but he really, in his heart, is an entrepreneur. And to have someone who very much is rooting for you as an entrepreneur is a very helpful thing. So I would say, number one, surround yourself with people who are like, I get what you're doing, I think it's cool what you're doing, because every moment where you're not sure, they're sort of pushing you through with this, no, this is amazing, this is cool, this is great. That's been incredibly helpful. And then I think women particularly are very reluctant, and myself included, to ask for help. You know, the journalism part of my new job, I run an independent production company now. The journalism part is actually quite easy, and getting deals done is not been hard, knock on plastic table. But but you know what's hard is running a business. I mean, I'm in charge of HR, I'm in charge of, you know, the budget, I'm in charge of hiring, I'm in charge of all these things that I frankly really hadn't done before. I am new to this. This is a new area for me, and it's hard for someone who's really actually quite good at a lot of stuff to not be good at something. And so I've been very aggressive about asking people for advice and just sitting down and saying, so how do you fire someone? How do you hire someone? What mistakes did you make? What should I be doing here? What about this? What about that? And you'd be surprised when you ask people very pointed questions all the time. There has not been anybody who has said to me, you know, I don't have time to answer your question. In fact, every single person has said, well, let's set up another meeting. Let's set up another time to talk again. And I think that the reluctance that I had in asking for help, I've really now gotten over. It's really important to be just aggressive about asking people to back you up and give you some guidance.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that, because you're right. A lot of women feel insecure about expressing that they may need help with something. But the only way to advance in anything that you're doing is to seek mentorship and advisement from people around you. So I would actually love to hear, how did you find your first set of mentors, your advisors, your sponsors?
My first in general, my very first was, you know, it was always people I worked with. I mean, my very first were my parents, obviously, but in work, my very first were people I worked with. And listen, I think there's a quid pro quo. I think people are pretty awful about finding mentors. I can't tell you the number of people who have said to me, hey, will you be my mentor? And I'm like, no, I don't want to be your mentor. I have 4 kids. Like, that's not how you get a mentor. A mentor needs to be somebody who overlaps with you, who you really who you're gonna cross paths with every day. I mean, I think you need a mentor who is really working consistently in what you're working in. So one of my very first mentors, my first mentors were people who I was just working with, and then they saw the value that I could bring, and then they recognized there was quid pro quo. So one of my bosses early on used to say, you know, have me go get dry cleaning, you know, which was very much against PA rules to use. But I was like, listen, I'm happily going to go get your dry cleaning. Later, can I ask you some questions about this and this and this and this? I mean, you know, it was... another boss that I had, he used to get in, my job started at 9 a.m. and I used to get in at 8:30, and I would go pick up coffee for him every single day and drop it off at his office, and in that 30 minutes before our work was officially starting, I'd say, can I run some questions by you? You know, because we weren't we hadn't really started our day yet. And it was just, yeah, I think you have to be cognizant about, well, here's what I can bring to this relationship. In exchange, you can give me some advice. As you go along, you know, your mentors change. You have peer mentors, friends who can help you kind of see yourself through another angle. And then sometimes there's more formalized mentoring programs. I've never had great luck with formalized mentoring programs, and there are not a lot in journalism. I just felt that it was always better when I sort of had the guts to go and figure out, like, oh, that's a person I need to talk to. How am I gonna get in their sphere, and how am I gonna get them to want to talk to me?
So, Soledad, you just talked a little bit about the fact that there was a lack of formal mentorship programs for those in the area of journalism. As a woman in the media industry, what have been some of your biggest challenges?
You know, I think there's challenges that are just journalism challenges. It's hard to get a job. It's a competitive industry. I think sometimes you're trying to figure out, am I crazy? Is this becoming a challenge because I'm just not doing the job well? Is it me personally? Is it just, hey, they just don't like, you know, people in general? Is it, hey, they just don't like you specifically? You know, I think it's I think there's a whole host of challenges, and I don't know that you can necessarily say, well, this one is because I'm black, and this one is because I'm female, and this one's because I'm a working mom. I mean, I don't know that it's ever that clear. I think that really, if you're lucky, you get to be part of a group where you're really advocating for each other and backing each other up in a meeting. I mean, a more realistic scenario is you're in a meeting and you feel that people are saying things that are ridiculous, but you're too low on the totem pole to weigh in, so you sort of sit there like an idiot and don't say anything, meanwhile cringing from the conversation. I think when you're part of a network, you can have that conversation even if you're a low-level employee. You could be texting someone, you can say to them, listen, I think this is a problem, and that could all be back-channeled without having to stand up at a meeting and put sort of the scrutiny on yourself. I did have a lot of challenges when I was pregnant because I think people had a lot of a sense that pregnant women, especially in journalism, sort of shouldn't be there, didn't want to work, probably wouldn't put in a full day, probably were incapacitated in some capacity, and I really wasn't, and so I often had to fight to go on stories, or even when my kids were born, you're a mom, you're not going to want to go, you're not going to want to stay away from home, things like that, and I was just constantly exploding people's expectations about what you wanted to do and what you were willing to do.
So I definitely want to make sure that we talk about work-life balance, because I think that that's something that a lot of women, regardless of whether they have their own companies or not, struggle with. Can I have it all? The infamous question. But before we go there, one of the things that you talked a little bit about was being in a boardroom and being afraid to make too much of a splash, so to say, and cause too much attention to yourself. One of the questions that we have here from Monique Edmonds is, what are some of the things you do to move forward in your endeavors when fear presents itself? Because fear can be a great paralyzer for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I think you have to listen to fear. Fear can be that really smart, don't go and do this particular thing. I think I'm a big list maker, so I'm constantly running the pros and cons of everything. And I think I have a pretty good group of advisors who will tell you, yeah, you should be afraid, but what's the downside if you fail? Not very much, so you should go for it. Or, wow, that downside if you fail is pretty big, but you should go for it anyway. I think it's a combination of having a pretty good sense of yourself and being able to do a good self-assessment. Is it fear of embarrassment? Is it fear of failure? Is it fear of physical fear? Like, what is it? And really being able to analyze. So I do a pros, here's why I should do this, here's why I should take this job or do this thing, here's why I should not do it. 9 times out of 10, my one side of the list is much longer than the other, and I know exactly what I should be doing. If not, I really turn to trusted advisors who will say, listen, I'm hearing you say blah, 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 or I know you as the kind of person who's always nervous about blah, blah, blah. And then they help you. Again, it's kind of an assessment of what you're able to do. So I think that combination, you just can't, I guess for me, fear, when I deal with my kids, right, and they're nervous about something, I'm always like, all right, let's extrapolate it out. It's gone horribly. Oh my God, the worst thing you imagined has happened. It was awful. So walk me through what happened. And usually at the end, they get to something of like, it was terrible and I was really embarrassed and I cried. And you're like, all right, well, so you cried. Sounds like that's not so much to lose. Let's go do it. And if you can take it out, extrapolate it out to the worst possible scenario unfolding, usually it's not a terrible scenario, right? Yeah. It's fixable, it's changeable, and that's really much how I operate. I think I'm pretty pragmatic about the decisions I'm making.
So along those lines, again, one of our women wanted to know, have you ever felt like you've hit rock bottom? If so, how did you bounce back? And it kind of is a great segue between what you
rock bottom?
Yeah. Maybe it was 3 pints of Haagen-Dazs.
No, I'm in the middle of doing a documentary on heroin addiction, so no, I feel like, considering what I've been dealing with other people who have hit rock bottom, no. No, I never felt like, I've never felt like I've hit rock bottom, and I think that's because I have a pretty good sense of what my skills are. And I think if you have skills, every job I went to, I went to grow my skill set, right? I wanted to start the job this way, and by the time I left, whether I left because I stormed out the door and slammed it behind me and said, I'll never see you again, or if I left with people throwing flowers at me and crying because they love me so much, I wanted to have a skill set that had grown, right? I wanted to take with me more things than I started with. I think that's how you have to look at every single job, whether it's you leave in a good way or you leave in a terrible way. So I never felt like rock bottom, because I always feel like I'm progressing. Even things that end badly, you feel like, oh, that was a terrible job. But boy, I learned how to do this. I made these new contacts. I discovered this about myself. Wow, I'm pretty good at this. I really know I need to work on these 3 things, right? You walk away with a grown skill set. And if you really think about each job opportunity the right way, you'll never go downward. You're always going, the right direction. Just maybe trying to figure out which is the next opportunity to take advantage of.
So in this theme of motivation, Candace Coleman wanted to know, is there a particular point in your childhood that you can pinpoint that may have influenced the woman that you are today? And it's obvious to me and everyone who has really looked up to you that you operate in your passion. And for some people that comes to them very early, and for some people they find out what they're passionate about later on in life. Did you ever kind of know as a young woman, a young girl, I'm going to be Soledad OBrien one day? Like, my name will really
yes,
mean
but it meant
something.
nothing. I say all the time, and it meant nothing. No, I really certainly didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. I felt like I always had a good sense of what I liked to do, and I liked being good at certain things, and then I would seek to go and make sure that I was doing them. I liked to write. I loved working in a newsroom, even when I was, the coffee fetcher girl. So I really just would say, like, oh, I really enjoy this. I'm going to get more skills, and I'm really going to work hard at it because I'm liking it, and I'm kind of good at it. I'm good at even the most mundane, crappy stuff. I'm pretty good at. So no, I don't know that you ever really, wake up one day and you feel like, oh, I know my purpose. I think you just keep, and I'm not even sure I know it now. I like reporting. I think I'm good at it. I like reporting.
You're great at it.
I'll send you some clips of some stuff I did early on, and we can be the judge of that. I like doing good, high quality work. I like that I'm not just reporting, but that my work is kind of like a notch up, which is important to me, which means I need to leave a lot of time to study and to make tweaks and to fix things and really make it great. And I also like to be able to present myself in a thoughtful way. So if I'm a spokesperson for something, I'm going to be on this weekend I was on Face the Nation, that I've really done my homework. So I'm thoughtful and intelligent and articulate. And so I think those principles kind of guide what I think Soledad OBrien in my head should be. And that means I have to study. That means I have to look a certain way. That means I have to get some sleep. That means I have to do high quality work. That means I have to do not just a first draft, but a 5th draft, and tweak again, and then run it by people and tweak it again to make sure that it's everything that I want it to be. So it's, again, I think of it in very pragmatic terms. I never thought of myself as like, oh, I'm living in my purpose. It's just more like, listen, I don't do crappy work, whether we're talking about cleaning the bathroom or we're talking about a documentary. My bathrooms are very, very clean. My documentaries are very high quality.
So, speaking of your documentaries, obviously Black in America is, particularly within the African American community, one of the most famous series that you have done and that has been done on our community, period. What really inspired you to do Black in America, and then obviously go on and do Latino in America?
It wasn't me. The guy who was the president of CNN at the time, a guy named Jim Walton, he was a worldwide president, he was interested in looking at a documentary on the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. And so we decided we would do 6 hours, 2 hours on the assassination of Dr. King, and then we broke the next 4 hours into the black man and the black woman for Black in America, which, looking back, was a very bad way to divide it, but it was really, literally just a way to divide it. And if I could do it again, I would have just organized it differently. And so that was it. And then it was kind of handed off to me, like, do you want to do this? And if so, go for it. So, it was never my idea. It was the concept of where are we today, 40 years after the assassination of Dr. King. And I thought that was a really great way to frame it. About 6 months into our work on that documentary, Barack Obama decided that he would run for the presidency. So that completely changed the tenor of the work we were doing. And so I think that just the timing became really pretty amazing, and the kinds of questions we were asking and the kinds of things that we were talking about became incredibly relevant. But that was just crazy lucky timing. Same time around that we've done this, which is our 7th Black in America. We're now starting our 8th, which was looked at, our documentary itself started with the killing of Eric Garner. We had no idea that the very week that that documentary would come out, that the grand jury would be considering charges against the police officer who choked him, and that within days that would set off a massive protests, not only in New York City, but around the country, and that was the opening of our documentary, and our focus of our documentary was that very topic. These things are done in advance. And people would say to me, wow, that's just incredibly lucky. And I would say, actually, unfortunately, I think that the killing of unarmed black men is so frequent that we probably could air it again in 6 months and also be incredibly timely, and 3 months after that and also be incredibly timely. So I think sometimes we've just been really fortunate in what the conversation is, and that we're tapped into that conversation.
I love that you just shared that, and we do have some kind of questions about diversity later on.
Sure.
But timing in people's career is something that, especially for millennials, we've been known to kind of rush through things. At least that's the way our generation is painted. But there seems to be a theme for you that the timing just happened to kind of be right. It wasn't that you were trying to make it that time. The timing just happened to be one that afforded what you were doing to just blow up.
Yeah, but I think there is. I mean, certainly in my personal life, I've always been very much on the clock of, I have places that I want to go and things I want to do. So if it's not going to happen here, then I'll go somewhere else. I mean, it's really why I started my company. It's like there's stuff I want to do, and there are conversations I want to have, and I want to go do them. And if we can't do it here, no harm, no foul. Let's go someplace else. And I do think that you have to be careful. You have to really moderate when do you stay and when do you really invest time in. And again, it's back to that. Skill set, right? It's back to have I really learned everything that I can learn in this place? Is there stuff that I still am able to learn? And then you decide, no, I've gotten everything that I think I can get out of this particular thing. Let me move to something else. But I think sometimes impatience is a very good thing. I think it's a mistake to sit around and wait for people to recognize your greatness. I mean, you might be waiting a really long time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to make your opportunities happen. And also be a realist. So while you're talking to people who are saying, yes, you can do it, or yeah, this might not be the right time for you. I mean, I've asked 1 million people before I started my production company, and actually I started working on my production company 2 years before I left CNN. So by the time it was time to go, everything was in place. It wasn't gee, what should I do? It was, I've always wanted to do this. I put things in place. I've already got an LLC in order. Let's launch this company because I've been talking about it for 2 years.
Well, it's interesting that you say that again, because Tamika Morrison wanted to know how much strategy did you put into building your brand while at CNN, and how did that help or not in the transition to your signature role right now?
I put a lot into it. I don't think I thought of it as my brand. I just thought of it as I do quality work. And so, yeah, I mean, I was obsessive about, and sometimes Black in America was a good example of really arguing with people vociferously at times. And sometimes in very nasty ways about what I thought the content should be. It doesn't really win you any friends. Like people, some people really believe the anchor should sit there and shut up and just read what's written. Mm-hmm. And that was never my role. And I was like, if I'm going to be the face of this, then I'm going to be the face of it. I'm going to do this. This belongs to me, and I took a lot of ownership of it. I don't think I was thinking because my brand is. Mm-hmm. I think I was thinking like I'm a journalist and I want to be good at this, so I have to have ownership of this particular thing. And then I think that it clearly paid off over time, and I began to get a reputation, and then knowing that when I was going to leave, that I was taking that reputation with me, and it was a really good reputation inside the building and outside the building too. So within 2 days of leaving, we had, contracts everywhere to do projects. I mean, we just really, if anything, we've been just crazy busy in an independent production company, which is incredibly lucky. But I think a lot of that was just taking our, the brand, if you will, and people just knew what it was. We'd been very consistent. Some of that was when I felt that something was not right in a script, whether it was a Black in America documentary or a piece that I was doing on my morning show or an interview I was doing in the morning show. I would be like, no, here's how we have to do it. Let's change it. This has got to be like this. I had a very clear sense of like what my job was and what I was responsible for. And that if I was on television, anything that was coming out of my mouth, I was responsible for. Anything that was on the air with my voice on it, I was responsible for. You have to sort of say, this is me, I own this, and it's got to be as good as I need it to be.
So, Soledad, when you did venture out on your own, one thing that we have kind of seen sometimes happen with people is when you have a large brand, in this instance, CNN, backing you, and you work for this company, people pick up the phone, they return the calls, things start to happen because they know that there's this titan behind you. When you go off on your own, sometimes people don't respond to calls, they don't respond to your emails as much. And so Danielle Hawk wants to know, what was the hardest part about going out on your own? And do you think there's a growing trend in more people choosing career independence?
I think there is a growing trend in more people choosing career independence. I never had a problem with anybody answering phone calls, and I did think that would be an issue. Like, listen, if I can't put them on TV tomorrow morning, maybe they're not going to be interested in, in answering my phone call or getting back to me. And I actually was surprised the exact opposite happened. So many people were interested in creating media that they would say, like, I like what you do. Now, how do we get together and turn this into a thing? So I'm probably 10 times busier than I was before I left CNN, which is kind of crazy. I had sort of kind of predicted the opposite. So the biggest challenge truly has been those things that come with corporate America, right? You have a corporate card, you have an IT guy, you have direct deposit. I mean, all those are nice perks, right? When my iPhone breaks, I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do. And I have to finally call someone to come and help me. Like, I don't have an IT guy who's going to say, hang on, Soledad, let me run right down and come help you out. Which, all things considered, is fine. It's a perfectly fine trade-off. I don't mind it at all. But that literally is the biggest challenge, has been that. I was surprised that the phone call thing was not an issue. The platform thing was not an issue. I would say what was an interesting sort of personal challenge for me was to figure out what to call myself, because I didn't feel like a CEO immediately. And I would say CEO, and they, you could. I found that I was almost too many words. Well, I'm running an independent production company, but what I'm really doing, and you're just like, stop. And eventually I realized that I just could figure out what I was going to say. I'm a reporter, I'm a journalist, I'm a documentarian, whatever it is, and just deliver it and not worry so much about framing it for other people, right? Because working for a big company gives you that. I work for IBM. I work for Google. I work for Goldman Sachs. I work for CNN. I work for NBC. Whatever it is, it sort of brings all that heft of credibility with it. And when you lose that, you sort of feel like, well, what do I say? That was a little bit of a challenge, and it didn't really take very long to just come up with, okay, I run a production company, period.
I'm sure, I'm sitting here in awe myself, so I'm sure the women who are watching this and men who are watching this are feeling very connected to what you're saying and just how personable it is and how relatable it is, because many people do struggle with that. What do I call myself? How do I introduce myself? And the introduction is the first part of people kind of getting to know you as an entrepreneur. And sometimes people feel as though they're faking it. But that's not really faking it if that's exactly what you're doing. One of the titles that you didn't mention, two of the titles that you didn't just mention, were wife and mother. And so as we move to the work-life balance piece of this, a lot of women, and men again, wanted to know, how do you manage all of this?
Usually very terribly.
No.
No, I think there's this whole, I really dislike, with all due respect, conversations about work-life balance, because I don't think there is any. And it's sort of framed like, how do you divide it so that it all runs smoothly? And it really doesn't. It just isn't going to. I mean, it's just not. And I guess I look at it like, plates at the circus, right? The guy with the plates. And you sort of kind of keep plates spinning, and that plate is a work project, and that plate is, oh, I've got this thing coming down the pike, and I've got a meeting in 2 weeks I got to prepare for, and then I've got the kid, and we've got to do their application for, ninth grade somewhere, and this kid's got a big test, and oh my gosh, I got to remember the Secret Santa gift, and then one of the plates, and then another thing comes up, right, and a plate starts to fall. Someone has gotten the flu, right, and then all of a sudden, boom, that becomes the main plate. And your job now is just to keep that plate going, and everything else kind of goes to the side. And then that plate's fine, they get over the flu, it goes back down, but oh my God, that work project is exploding. Okay, that's the plate you focus on now. It really is much more like that than thinking like, every day I start off with this zen, calm idea of balance, and it's, and it's amazing. It's not. You try to get as much done as you possibly can without losing your mind. You try to make sure you're surrounding yourself, and I think this is really key, with people who you like, because if you're going to be running through your day, you want to make sure anybody you're spending time with is someone you really want to be with. You want to make sure your spouse is somebody who's got your back and who loves you and who is, on your side in things, so that you're on the same team when it comes to your kids or your job or whatever it is. And I think you really want to make sure that the time you're spending with your kids is really, good quality, one-on-one, not with the phone there kind of time, if you possibly can. So I guess I just have never thought of it as balance. I think it's about focusing on those things that are urgent right away. And I'll give you a story. When my son, I have a son who's deaf. I have 4 kids. So my oldest is 14, girl. My next oldest is 12, girl. And then I have twin boys who are 10. And when my son was about 6, he almost immediately went from passing hearing tests to failing. His twin brother, not changed, but he just suddenly was failing his hearing tests, and he suddenly became hearing impaired. He was deaf, 85% deaf. And I remember just, I was traveling and on a story, and the doctor who had assessed him wouldn't tell us. He said, well, they do that classic, like, well, we've got some news. You have to come in. I'm like, what? I'm in the field somewhere. Like, no, I can't come in. You have to tell me over the phone, conference call with my husband, or I will take him to another doctor and he'll tell us. And and he said, listen, Jackson he's deaf and he's got this degenerative hearing loss. And I remember the two of us were just like, oh, okay, phew, that explains a lot. Right? Wow, I feel so much better. Thank you for that explanation. Now we can move into the phase of helping this kid. And so for the next few months, we really were all about, that became the most important plate. And everything else sort of took, back, and Brad and I juggled getting him off to appointments and getting him, molds for his ears and getting him acclimated in school. That became our focus. And then when he was fine and doing well in school, we sort of were able to put our focus on other things. I think it's much more like that than balance ever.
Yes, that's awesome. That was I don't have kids, and I just got a dog.
Want some?
So,
let me know if I should drop some off at your house. Just for like a month.
I would gladly take them. So before we have about 15 minutes to wrap up, before we start doing some audience Q&A, but I did want to ask you this question. Obviously, you just talked a lot about work-life balance, or your belief that that's not necessarily the way that it goes. But as a woman in business, what role do you think, particularly women of color in business, play in the upliftment and advancement of our communities? As you probably know, Hispanic and African American female businesses are the fastest growing businesses in the United States. And how do you think that we as women of color in business have the potential to change our communities through our entrepreneurial and professional
massively.
endeavors?
I will tell you, I have never asked a woman, any woman, women of color, anybody, I have never asked a woman for help with my business, even if it was just help me think an idea through, help me figure out this thing that's troubling me, help me figure out how to have a conversation about something. I have never, ever, ever had someone say, I don't have time for you, sorry. Ever. And I don't think that's because I could put them on TV. I think it's just they were just generous with their time. They understood how hard it could be, and they wanted to give what they had learned to me. And I feel the same way when someone asks me for help about advice in launching a company, and I say, listen, I'm a fledgling company, but absolutely, let me know, what can I do to help you? So I think there's a tremendous role for women of color to be helpful in their communities, because we are the community, and there's tremendous growth in the community among people who are small business owners. But the challenge in being a small business owner is you make a lot of mistakes. You're like, wait, I need a 10-4, what? My taxes are due when? And quarterlies, what? And someone says, listen, here's what you do. Here's the person to call. Here's how you handle this. This is what you made this mistake. Here's how you fix it. I think there's a real community of people who help you become successful. No one knows how to do everything immediately overnight.
Good. That's actually that very community is what we're trying to create, what we are creating with Walker's Legacy. Again, named in honor of Madam C.J. Walker, who was a great inspiration to me. And when I had my company, I would read her biography all the time as a way to mentor myself or self-mentor, just by hearing about her story and her perseverance as a female entrepreneur. So I will conclude there and pass it over to Jewel to see if we can get some audience participation from some folks via Twitter or from our G Plus page who have some questions for you directly, Soledad.
Sure.
Yes. So we've had some questions come in via Twitter and Google Plus. So I will ask some of them now, if that's all right. So
Sure.
the first question is, what can communities and content creators of color do to boast the production of content that reflects their culture and diversity if capital isn't always an option, or if that's an obstacle for them? And yeah, let's start with that.
So I would say one of my biggest regrets, and partly because I'm a little old school, is that I don't shoot and I don't know how to edit. My skills are not on that. And I think the great news about technology today has become so inexpensive that you actually don't need a lot of capital to be able to do great storytelling. You know, my kids will go somewhere and they will do amazing storytelling, you know, by shooting things on their phones. As, you know, now in schools they require this. I mean, it's incredible. So I would say there's a lot that you're able to do at a very low cost, leveraging technology and then gathering people around in a community to have a conversation around that story that you've told. The myth of, well, I need to go buy a $15,000 camera and I'm going to need someone to fund me for $100,000. That's not true for some really tremendous projects that can be done on a shoestring if you have the skills, if you can shoot, if you can edit. So I guess I would say invest in yourself, learn those skills. If I didn't have 4 kids and a full-time plus job, I literally would go back and learn how to shoot because I don't know how to shoot. And I'd learn how to edit because then I could put together even just some basic stories that I can't do myself. So I don't think capital always has to be a roadblock. At the end of the day, what makes the stories that we do great, yeah, it's fabulous shooters, yeah, you know, great, you know, setups, but really you find a great character, and that's free, right? Finding someone who's an amazing character costs nothing. You know, then you just capture them, figure out how to put that story together, and then connecting that at some point to a buyer can help you with those affiliated costs.
Awesome. And we had another one come in along those same lines in terms of what was the first step in starting your production company?
My production company really started 2 years before I left CNN. And I was, I just kind of, so I guess the first step was really knowing that there were things that I'd like to do and that I wasn't getting to do them all the time. And I always thought, like, well, you know, if I could, one day I'd like to just do, if I were ever to break off on my own, I would kind of, you know, really thinking about, like, here's what I'd like to do. And this is kind of what my production company would look like if I ever had one day down the road. And it was really that pie in the skying about an idea that really, when I was leaving CNN, when the show that I was doing, you know, they wanted to take it another direction. They wanted to hire different people to do my job. You know, it allowed me to say, great, because there's something else I've been thinking about, and it's pretty well formed. And actually, I've already created an LLC around it, and it exists. And you know, all I need to do is kind of go and do it. I think having that conversation and those thoughts 2 years earlier made that transition so much easier, and I had really fleshed it out in my head.
Awesome. So we actually had a question come in from Google Plus, user Merlix Harris. And thinking back to your time at CNN, so now that you're a CEO, you don't have to worry so much about this question, but giving advice to those who are still in a corporate culture, she wants to know, how do you determine your ask, whether it be for an increase in salary or projects? How do you go about figuring out what's your ask going to be and how you're actually going to ask for those things?
So the salary part is hard for me to determine because when you're in news, you don't go in for an annual review and get a salary. You know, it doesn't work like that. So I'll skip the salary part. The bigger part for if you're a reporter is really to be put on a project, right? And I think sometimes people put the cart before the horse. I've had many people who'd say to me, I have been here for 15 years and I deserve, and I'm like, whoa, like, whoa, no, you're not creating your worth, right? No one cares if you've been there. In fact, if anything, they might say, Jesus, you've been here 15 years, and you're still doing blah, blah, blah. You really need to say, you know what I know that you need is, and I'm volunteering to do this. Tell me where you need to send me. Where can I be most useful? Where can I be helpful? What story can I tell that we're not doing? I'm happy to stay late. I'm happy to stay, it really is, and now that I run a company, I really see it much more clearly. This idea of like, well, here's what I want when you're an employee is not a really good strategy. You really want to go to the person and say, what are the needs that you have? Because there's some things that I think I'd be good at. I'm wondering if they match the needs that you have. And if you, as an owner, if someone says that to me, I'm like, well, wow, what a great question. Okay, here are the needs that I have. And people who frame it that way, it's a win-win. I get someone to come in and help me with something. They get to fulfill the dream that they had or the thing that they were interested in exploring. But if you sit down and say to me, listen, I have been here for a year now, and I really feel like I should be, I'm like, I don't care. I literally do not care at all how you feel. I have so much going on that I need you to be part of a team, and that team needs to be really surrounded getting these great projects done. And we all need to be on the same page. So I think that's where people make their mistake. I've heard so many times someone say, I've been here for X number of years. It's such a terrible strategy. Nobody cares. Nobody thinks of it, of rewarding someone for time served in the company.
Interesting. So there's another kind of thread going on Twitter that people want to get your thoughts on.
Sure.
This idea of the imposter syndrome. So thinking essentially that everyone's going to find out about me, find out that I don't really deserve these accolades, or something that really plagues a lot of women in business is that I'm not good enough for this success. So just curious to kind of hear your thoughts on this whole thing.
I really believe everybody has some version of the imposter syndrome, and that when we sort of target women as the ones who suffer from this syndrome, I mean, it makes it seem like it's some kind of dysfunction. I think that's how you grow. Anybody who's taking a job that they're unprepared for, is normal. If you're taking a job and you 100% can do that job, then you're an idiot, because you're not going to grow in that job. You need to be able to talk your way into it a little bit, BS your way into it a little bit, right? And be a little bit in over your head. And then your job is to kind of learn the job and doggy paddle your way through it till you get to the point of like, yeah, now I've got the job. Then you execute on the job well, then you grow, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I've now been doing it for a couple of years and I got to move on. Like, I'm doing it. If you take every job that you're great at, what's the point? So I think we've made it a syndrome for women. I think every human being jumps in, is a little in over their head. You fake it, so no one wants to hear that you're freaking out. So you're like, oh yeah, it's good, I'll go, it's great. And when you're like, your friends know you're freaking out. And then you learn it on the fly. And then you're good, and then you move on to the next level. Every single job I've taken, I literally had no idea how to do the actual job. And, the first couple months were rough, and you had to learn on the go.
Awesome. And one last question, a little bit selfish from a Googler in me, but curious about how you have involved technology in your business and how you managed to balance your Twitter life and all the other social media.
I'm so bad. I'm not sure. Balance. There's that word, balance.
I know. It's a terrible word. We should throw it out. But
I actually, in 2015, I'm a big resolution maker. I love New Year's is my favorite holiday, and I love to make resolutions. And right now, when I roll out of bed, I check my Twitter feed. I'm really involved in kind of every day being part of this conversation. I love it. I like Instagram. And I think I'm going to try to do less in 2015 or make it more manageable, because I really do feel like I'm sometimes too involved in technology, and I want to kind of have it not be the first thing I do in the morning. I want to have it really add more benefit to my life. So I'm trying to work that out, because I do find myself walking and tweeting and texting and taking notes and phone calls, and you never have a moment of rest. And if you don't have a moment of rest, you don't have a moment of creativity. You really need that 6-hour chunk. Like, I think sometimes if you see a big open space in your calendar, it scares you, but really you need a 6-hour space where you're doing nothing. You have to do nothing, you don't have to read, and you just can sit there and think about ideas. So for for 2015, I'm really going to focus on that because I think it then makes you more effective and more efficient when you're back in technology. You've really thought through, some of those ideas. You're not just blah, 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 connecting around, noise.
I think that's great advice, and definitely I know Natalie and myself, I've seen her on Twitter and on email at 2 a.m., and I know the same goes for me, so that's something we'll focus on in 2015 as well as,
It's a group resolution. I love
Yes.
a group resolution. Let's meet up again in February. You can tell me how you're doing, because I have a feeling I might be struggling.
Perfect.
Well, awesome. Jewel, thank you so much for leading the Q&A. And, I just can't say how exciting it has been to spend this time with you, Soledad.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you for doing this. And so many women are inspired by you. We're seeing their comments on Twitter, and we're seeing it on G+. And we really want to thank those who submitted their questions and participated in this engaging dialogue. Walker's Legacy Programming looks to bring you insightful, meaningful opportunities for conversations and community, and we hope that you found today's program to be very special. I would like to thank our partners Accelerate with Google, Jewel Burks, of course, the lovely, and Chris Gentile, who has been an amazing partner and supporter to Walker's Legacy. If you aren't a member of the organization yet, please go online and join for free and become a part of the Walker's Legacy National Growing Community. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your week.